Welcome to a place where time doesn't erase desire, it deepens it, where deep love isn't rushed, it's awakened slowly, breath by breath, glance by glance. Here, we tell stories that don't shy away from age, longing, or truth. Stories where a single touch after years of silence feels like being born again, where being seen, truly seen, by someone half a lifetime younger isn't fantasy, it's revelation. This is where quiet glances turn into confessions. Where skin remembers, hearts reopen, and love, real love, returns when you thought it never would. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever longed to feel again, if you believe love doesn't follow rules, then you're home. Subscribe now and step into true love stories that burn slow, touch deep, and never apologize for how real they feel. There was a time when the house creaked louder than any voice inside it, when footsteps were the only sound, and even they felt like ghosts. The mirrors didn't lie, but they didn't speak kindly either. They whispered time's passage in soft lines and skin that didn't glow like it used to. The eyes in the reflection still held warmth, but it felt locked behind a kind of loneliness only years can build. Days came and went, and none of them touched the skin. Nothing stirred the heart. Nothing reached deep enough to make it feel like it could still beat for someone again. People stop seeing after a certain age. Not out of cruelty, just out of habit, like the world assumes there's nothing left to uncover, no more chapters worth reading. Strangers passed by with eyes that looked through, not at. Conversations stayed polite, shallow. Even the friends who remained talked more about memories than moments. And somehow, the present began to feel like a waiting room, quiet, slow, and forgettable. He wasn't supposed to be anything more than a new set of hands to help with the yard. That was all. A neighbor's recommendation, someone to handle the overgrowth spring had left behind. There was nothing special about the day he arrived, except maybe the way the morning light softened the edges of the trees. He walked in with a quiet confidence, sleeves rolled, carrying only tools and a gentle kind of focus. Just another young man with dirt on his boots and sunlight in his eyes, but then he looked, not a glance. Not one of those fleeting acknowledgments that bounce off the surface. It was a stillness, like he paused inside the moment, just to see what was there. It was unsettling at first, foreign, because when you've been invisible for long enough, being seen feels almost too bright. Like stepping into the sun after years of shade, it made the breath catch, not because of the way he looked, though he was beautiful in the kind of effortless way that youth often carries. No, it was the way his eyes didn't ask questions. They just rested there, quiet, open, seeing everything without needing anything. At first, there wasn't much talking, just small exchanges, instructions, requests, compliments about the garden, the flowers, the way the breeze moved through the yard. But those words started to linger, they held weight. Each conversation left a trace, a warmth that didn't fade. He noticed things others didn't, like how the sunlight fell across the old porch chair in the afternoon, or the way the jasmine smelled strongest at dusk. He moved through the world slowly, intentionally, and slowly, that stillness he carried began to settle in the spaces around him. The strangest part wasn't that he saw, it was that it started to change everything. Mornings became something to look forward to again. There was a reason to brush the hair with care, to wear the soft blue shirt that used to feel pretty. There was a reason to open the windows a little wider, to let the scent of cut grass mix with old records playing in the background. The silence began to shrink, edged out by laughter, by presence, by the sound of two people sitting close without needing to fill every second with words. He didn't try to make anything happen. That was what made it all so pure. He just kept showing up, week after week, never in a hurry to be somewhere else, never looking at his phone, always offering to stay a little longer to finish one last thing. Sometimes it was nothing more than trimming the hedge. Other times, it was just sitting on the porch steps, hands covered in dirt, sweat at his brow, talking about nothing and everything. It was in those small, ordinary moments that something extraordinary began to grow. There was a day late spring, maybe early summer, when the breeze was warm and heavy. He was quiet that day, more than usual. Something in his eyes was softer. Maybe it was the light. Maybe it was the way he watched without making it feel like watching. That day he said nothing for the longest time, just sat beside the chair, resting his arms on his knees, glancing over now and then like he was studying the lines of the face beside him, not to find flaws, but to memorize. And then, with a voice that barely broke the silence, he said, "You're beautiful when you don't realize anyone's looking." There was no reply. Couldn't be. The heart had forgotten how to respond to words like that. Not just the compliment, but the truth in it, the way it was delivered, like it wasn't a line or a favor or even a gift, just a fact he felt in his bones. That night, the mirror didn't reflect years. It reflected something else, something that hadn't been there in a long time, a softness around the mouth, a brightness in the eyes, a flush in the cheeks that had nothing to do with makeup. Something had shifted. The air felt warmer, the body felt lighter, the silence felt sacred instead of empty. The presence of someone who truly sees doesn't just fill a room, it rewrites the story that's been echoing for too long. The story that said it was too late, that there was no more beauty left to unfold, that love, real love, only lived in the past. But when someone looks at you like you're the beginning of a song they didn't know they'd been waiting to hear, it changes everything. Some connections don't announce themselves loudly. They grow slowly, like vines, wrapping around the quiet spaces of the soul, blooming in the corners you thought were closed forever. And sometimes that connection doesn't care about the difference in years, the whispers of others, or the boundaries written by time. It just exists, pure, steady, certain, being seen again, truly seen, wasn't about vanity. It was about feeling alive in a way that had nothing to do with youth. It was about feeling like a story worth reading, a song worth singing, a soul still capable of stirring, trembling, opening, and in that gaze, everything forgotten was remembered. It started like warmth you don't notice at first, like the sun rising behind clouds, lighting things softly without ever demanding to be seen. There was no moment, no sudden realization, no sharp turn from one feeling into another. Just a quiet shift, like a breath drawn deeper than usual, like a forgotten song playing faintly in the background, familiar stirring, the way his hands worked in the soil, steady, sure, never rushed, was the first thing that drew attention. Not just the strength in them, but the patience, the way he treated the earth like it was something sacred, something that needed care, not control. There was something deeply grounding about it, watching him coax life from dirt and root. It felt like watching someone speak a silent language, one made of movement and intention, and somehow, just watching him move became enough to bring stillness to the noise inside. The smile came next. It wasn't wide or deliberate, just soft, honest, the kind of smile that didn't try to charm, that didn't reach for approval. It came when he looked up after brushing dirt from his palms, or when a robin landed near the garden bed and he nodded at it like it was part of the team. It came when the scent of fresh rosemary passed through the breeze, and he'd say something simple like, "Smells like memories, doesn't it?" It came in moments most people wouldn't notice, but once seen, it was hard to forget. He didn't talk much, not at first, but the silence with him never felt empty. There was a comfort in the way he just existed beside the space. No pressure to entertain, no need to fill the air. Over time, those silences began to soften. Questions slipped in gently, then stayed a while. Things like, "Did you always live here?" Or "What made you choose those lavender bushes?" Simple things, but they had a weight to them, a weight that said he wasn't just asking to pass the time. He was listening, he was learning, Then came the stories, little pieces of his past shared in fragments. His mother's garden growing up, a summer job where he first learned to plant roses, his dog that followed him everywhere, even when he sang badly. And with every small detail he shared, something loosened in return. Words flowed back, about childhood afternoons spent under trees, about letters never sent, about years that slipped by too fast, and dreams that quietly stayed alive even when no one was watching. The air between began to change. It didn't feel still anymore. It felt charged, not loud, not demanding, just full of something invisible and rising. Even the way he stood near by started to hold a different kind of weight. When he reached past to hand a trowel, the brush of fingers felt like something more than accidental. When his voice dipped low in the late afternoon light, it felt like it sank straight into the skin. Not everything was said aloud, but everything was understood. There was a day when the sun hung low, casting long shadows on the porch, and he leaned against the wooden rail with dirt still under his nails. He talked about how the seasons always felt different in gardens, how you can feel time moving in the roots before you see it above ground. And in the middle of that thought, he looked, not just at, but into. The kind of gaze that lingers too long for comfort, yet not long enough to satisfy. It didn't need to be explained. That look was a door opening. Still, there was patience, a slowness, like he knew rushing would ruin it. Like whatever this was deserved the time it needed to become real. There were no bold declarations, no reckless moments, just subtle shifts, a second longer spent walking back to the gate, a gentle touch on the wrist while laughing, a pause before good, bye that felt more like an invitation than an ending, and inside something stirred, not just emotion, not just admiration, but want, a want that didn't rise with desperation, but with reverence, a want that respected the years, honored the quiet. It built not in the body first, but in the chest, behind the ribs, a warmth that began to ache when he left and glow when he returned. It was in the way he said good morning, like the words were meant for only one set of ears. In the way he noticed things no one else did, like the way the cardigan matched the tulips, or how the hands always brushed the railing twice before sitting down. This kind of desire didn't roar, it whispered. It curled up inside the space between conversation and silence. It lived in shared glances, in hands reaching for the same cup, in laughter that came too easily and stayed too long. There was no need to name it, no need to label what was growing, but it was real, it was undeniable. One afternoon, the rain came lightly, and instead of leaving, he stayed, just stood beneath the awning, close enough for the scent of wet earth to mix with his skin. There was music playing faintly inside, something old and slow. He didn't speak, just looked, and in that look there was everything, a question, a promise, a fire held back only by the thinnest thread of patience. Nothing happened that day, nothing that would leave a mark on the outside, but inside everything shifted. The want became something sacred, the air, the silence, the time. It all held weight now. Each day began to carry that same weight, that same anticipation. Not of what might happen, but of what already had, of something being born in slow, quiet, meaningful pieces. Because when desire grows like this, it's not just about touch. It's about being known before being held. About longing that lives in glances before it ever reaches the skin. About presence that makes everything around it more alive. And in that presence, the heart remembered it could still burn. It had always stayed just on the edge. The kind of closeness that hummed quietly between two people who knew how to speak without words. The kind that made simple things, like pouring tea, brushing past in a narrow hallway, handing over a folded blanket, feel like a current ran underneath. Still, there had been restraint, a gentle respect, a space held unspoken, where feelings bloomed in silence but were never picked. But something happens when presence becomes too much to carry, when a glance lingers too long. When a silence between sentences holds more weight than the words themselves, all those days filled with stillness, laughter, warmth, they built something, and eventually there came a night where pretending not to notice what had grown became harder than surrendering to it. It wasn't planned, not even expected. It was just the way the day had ended. Rain in the background, soft light in the hallway, music from a distant room, and then just him, standing there, eyes searching like he was waiting for permission he wasn't sure he deserved. There was something in the way his fingers twitched slightly at his sides, not nervous, reverent, as if what stood in front of him was sacred, and he didn't want to touch too soon. There had always been that difference of years of life lived. But in that moment it dissolved, not ignored, just irrelevant, because the way he stepped forward, the way he breathed like every second might shatter the spell, it wasn't youth reaching for experience. It was one soul reaching for another, carefully, without assumption. Slowly, so slowly, a hand rose, not grabbing, just brushing, like he was testing if the warmth was real, and it was. The first touch wasn't dramatic. It was soft, almost hesitant, a thumb running along the line of a jaw, the faintest tremble in his fingers, not from fear, but from feeling too much all at once. The way people tremble when they find something they didn't think they were allowed to want. His mouth was inches away, and for the longest moment he didn't close the space. His eyes searched again, silently asking if this was real, if this was allowed, if this spark between them, could be something more than unspoken moments. And then the distance closed, not in a rush, not in a firestorm, just lips finding lips like they were finding home, like two pieces of something ancient finally realigned. There was no performance in it, no desperation, just exploration, as if they were learning a new language, one made not of grammar or words, but of sighs and stillness and shared breath. He kissed like he was memorizing, like he didn't want to miss a single detail. Hands barely touching at first, then slowly resting on skin with a care that almost broke something inside, because it had been so long since touch had come without demand, without expectation, so long since it had been about tenderness instead of transaction. Every motion spoke something deeper, the way he pressed his forehead to hers, breathing slow, the way he exhaled like this moment had lived in his chest for too long, the way he whispered nothing, just silence, letting it speak for them. The air was thick, not with tension but with reverence, not about conquest but about connection. Clothes became an afterthought, discarded quietly, piece by piece, not torn away in hunger, but removed like secrets being shared. Every inch revealed was met with awe, not comparison, not a single glance held judgment, only wonder, only the kind of stillness that made it feel like time had stepped back to watch. When skin met skin, it wasn't fireworks. It was something deeper, something that made the heart ache and open all at once. Every touch was an offering, every kiss a vow, every breath a reminder that this presence, this moment, was not about age or rules or stories others would tell. It was about truth, the kind that doesn't need explaining, the kind that just is. He didn't move quickly. He moved like time wasn't real, like the space between now and forever could fit inside the curve of a shoulder or the dip of a waist. Every movement was filled with care. Every sigh drawn from the chest like it had been trapped there for years, and every time he looked, really looked, it felt like being seen not just for what the world thought was left, but for everything still burning inside. The world outside didn't exist in that space. There was only breath and warmth, and two bodies finally letting down every wall they had quietly held. And when the peak came, it wasn't just release, it was surrender. To the truth, to the longing, to the deep, slow, aching love that had bloomed from roots they never thought could take hold again. After he didn't pull away, he stayed close, chest against chest, arms wrapped not tightly but protectively. Like he wasn't just holding a body, but something far more fragile and far more valuable, and the silence afterward wasn't empty. It was full of what they didn't say, full of what didn't need to be said. He traced the edge of a shoulder with his fingertip, not to tease, just to stay connected, and he whispered, so quietly it almost wasn't heard, "I've never felt anything like this. Neither had I." Because when something so unexpected, so honest, so deeply rooted in presence finds its way into your life, it changes everything. It could have been mistaken for a moment, a passing connection, a sweet but fleeting chapter that life sometimes writes when least expected. But it wasn't. From the beginning, there was a depth to it, something in the way he listened, not just with his ears, but with his eyes, his presence, the way he sat in silence without ever making it feel empty. The way he touched like every line on the skin told a story worth reading slowly. Nothing about him felt rushed. Nothing felt careless. He never tried to fix the pain. That was the first thing that made it real. There had been pain, decades of it, wounds time tried to hide but never fully healed, loss, betrayal, loneliness that had taken root so deeply it no longer cried for company, but he didn't shrink from it. He didn't try to pretend it wasn't there. He made space for it, held it without judgment, let it breathe. In his youth, there was no arrogance, no desire to change what had been lived. He didn't romanticize the past or try to compete with it. Instead, he honored it, not with words, but with the way he saw value in every scar, with the way he leaned in during stories most would avoid, with the way he smiled, not because he didn't understand the weight of time, but because he did and still chose to stay. At night, when the world quieted and there were no more chores, no more schedules, no more roles to play, something else unfolded between the two of us. The closeness was more than physical. It was emotional surrender, vulnerability in its rawest form. He'd hold tight, but not to possess, only to assure that he was there, that he wasn't going anywhere, that he saw more than just what was outside. Every kiss felt like it belonged to something sacred. Not because it was new, but because it was honest. There was no performance, no effort to impress, just touch that said, "I'm here, I see you, I choose you." He'd trace the skin like it was a map, each line and curve something to discover, not hide. He never rushed, never demanded. It was as if time bent for him, slowed down so he could learn every part of what made someone feel loved again. And with every touch, the years didn't fade. They came alive. The body wasn't treated like something once beautiful. It was treated like something still beautiful, still worthy, still desired. And somehow, in his arms, nothing felt wrong. The age difference didn't feel like a canyon. It felt like a bridge, a way to meet each other halfway between experience and wonder. There was no pretending, just full truth. The kind of truth that can only exist when masks have long been dropped, when games no longer interest either heart, and when all that matters is how deeply you can look into someone and still find peace. There were nights he'd rest his head on my chest and just listen, not just to the heartbeat, but to everything it had carried, and sometimes he'd say nothing, just hold, breathe, match the rhythm of his body to mine like a silent promise. Like he knew that love wasn't always loud, that it sometimes lived in the quietest hours, where warmth speaks louder than words. The pleasure was there, yes, but it wasn't the point. The point was the connection, the kind that doesn't need fireworks because the flame it holds is steady, sure, and alive in every glance, every breath, every shared silence. It was the kind of pleasure that came not just from skin touching skin, but from soul recognizing soul. There were mornings when he'd rise before I did, and instead of leaving, he'd sit quietly nearby, fingers tracing the outline of my hand like it was something rare. And if eyes opened to meet his, there was always that same look. Not of conquest, not of victory, but of deep, quiet reverence, as if love itself was something we had been entrusted to carry, and he took that trust seriously. He wasn't afraid of the years. He welcomed them, asked questions about them, laughed with them, loved through them. He made the past feel like it had purpose, not just memory. made the body feel like it still mattered, still spoke, still had something to offer. And he listened, not just with ears or eyes, but with every part of himself. It wasn't about saving anyone. It was about holding each other exactly where we stood, without shame or apology. It was about two people who had no business falling in love, falling anyway. Because love, real love, doesn't ask permission. It doesn't check calendars or birth certificates. It just happens quietly, deeply, truly. And when it happens like that, it turns even the simplest moments into something sacred. A hand on the back, a shared blanket, a breath in the dark, a laugh at the wrong time, a whisper in the quiet. Nothing needed to be said to prove it. It just lived there between every heartbeat. And in his arms, love didn't feel like something to chase. It felt like something already found. If this story stirred something real in you, if it reminded you that it's never too late to be touched, to be seen, to be loved, then you're exactly where you're meant to be. These aren't just stories. They're reminders that love doesn't age, and neither does longing. So if you felt this, truly felt it like the video, subscribe for more, and share it with someone whose heart needs to remember. Because love like this doesn't whisper for long.